Hello, welcome to my Proseminar I, Language Unlimited. My name is Michael Schiffmann. For seminar purposes, even though technically it's Dr. Schiffmann and so on and so forth, just call me Michael, and when addressing me in German, let it be a du. I know this will take a while to sink in, but I think my experience is one can deal with the matters in the seminar better if we do it this way. Let me introduce to you the core book of this seminar right away. It's called The Wonders of Language, with the subtitle or How to Make Noises and Influence People by Jan Roberts, a very well known linguist who used to teach in Stuttgart a couple of years ago. That book has 10 chapters, and those 10 chapters will be the core of this introductory lecture. So we will cover basically everything that's in the book, and the book in turn covers all the important areas about language and linguistics that you might want to imagine. As is announced in the Vorlesungskatalog, we will also be using two other books. The first other book is called The Secret Life of Language. And the good thing about that book is that it doesn't just contain lots of written material. It also has lots of pictures in it. It has descriptions of the physical apparatus of speech in it, and so on and so forth. It's written for a general public, and I thought it could not hurt if we used that at least selectively, because this is a Proseminar I. And the final book, which will occupy us mostly towards the second half of the semester, is the one that gave the book its title, Language Unlimited, by another well-known linguist, namely David Adger, subtitle, The Science Behind Our Most Creative Power. So you will see, even in terms of reading material, we will be quite occupied, but don't go into the shock mode, because all of these materials are accessible to the layperson. You don't need to have an academic grade to get into it, and they were deliberately written that way. I will not deal extensively with the two last books. This will be the subject matter of another lecture. Let me now go into the 10 chapters of the Roberts book, and I will give you the overview. All right, here we go. So what you can see from the table of contents is, well, if you go to Linguistics 101, you have the first part, phonetics and phonology. That's in chapters 1 and 2 of this book. The next thing Linguistics 101 deals with is words, also called morphology, which means the science of how to form words. The fourth matter is actually a central one, namely syntax. And finally, we have something that's often very undercovered, so to speak, namely semantics. And we will do something in this seminar That is actually rare at English departments. We will deal with aspects of semantics which are often not dealt with. After that, one could say come the parts that are kind of soft linguistics, or it's often called hyphen linguistics. Things like social linguistics, psycholinguistics, historical linguistics. And also the very important part of linguistics, which is called pragmatics. And in the end, you also have a chapter on how to build a language typology and universals. That means that this seminar, even though we are at the English department, will not just deal with English linguistics, but also with a wide range of other languages, which I think will help shed a light on English also. It will give you a wider perspective of what linguistics is all about, but in doing so, you will also sharpen your sense and intuition about the English language itself. Okay, let me now go chapter-wise very briefly through this book so that you have an impression of what the seminar will be about. We will have 14 sessions, and that means that we can go do this chapter-wise after we have 2 introductory sessions, then chapter-wise week by week, and in the end we still have 2 wrap-up sessions. In the first half we will have more of the secret life of language, and in the second half we will have more of language unlimited. But it's not all that strict, it's the general rough outline. Okay, without further ado, chapter 1, phonetics. We begin by a very trivial but often also undercovered fact that actually when we talk about language, spoken language at least, what language is in the physical sense is nothing but that. It's sound waves. And the books we have at our disposal will help us to better understand the acoustics of language. So, for example, when we have a vowel, we have 2 basic sound waves. One is higher, the other is lower, and that is what makes a vowel. And we will see how this is related to the physical stuff in one of the books, namely to the vocal tract of human beings as opposed to other very closely related animals, which cannot produce these sounds because they don't have that kind of vocal tract. So a dog cannot produce vowels because the vocal tract is not suited. Even otherwise intelligent apes cannot do that, and so on and so forth. So that would be the first very physical aspect, but as you can see, there is a lot behind appearances that's not immediately visible to the naked eye or to the naked ear, and we will go into all these things. Chapter 2, phonology, becomes even more abstract in a sense. It becomes very systematic, and we will investigate how these things translate into things that you will also have heard about in Linguistics 101. Namely, how the human mind analyzes these sound waves into something that can be represented as three different and distinct letters, namely K, A, T, and that's related to a certain meaning, namely to the meaning of cat. Not very nice cat, but I think you see where I'm getting at. And the first interesting thing that the mind does here is it converts something that is digital, that is not digital, something that is analog into something that is digital, into distinct categories. Where if I replace K by P, I get pat instead of cat, which is a different word, and so on and so forth. The thing about which Galileo said a couple of centuries ago, that this is the most wondrous thing, the most wondrous invention of humankind, how you have 25 or such symbols and you combine them in various ways and they enable you to talk about everything that's in the world and even beyond. You can even talk about non-existent things. Okay, so these would be the first two parts. And in the process, I both hope to deepen your understanding and I also hope to deepen your abilities. So for example, if you understand the details of the vocal tract, this will help you to learn foreign languages. But more about that once we get into that. So I hope to also derive a practical use from this. Okay, chapter 3, morphology. Let me be brief. This is a very famous example in linguistics, Doc Schiff, and you know that you could make a longer word out of this. Donaudampfschifffahrts Kapitänsmütze, Mützenfabrikant, and so on and so forth. And the first lesson about morphology is there is no longest word. And this is where language already starts to be unlimited. Not in phonology. In phonology we also talk about syllables, and syllables for practical reasons have a finite length, but there is no longest word. And one of the things that we will see is that with regard there is no longest such thing. Morphology is very similar to syntax. And syntax is even more radical than morphology with regard to that. In morphology we can see a phenomenon such as the lexicon, meaning that an adult speaker of any language has around 50 to 60,000 words stored in his or her head. But in syntax we go even beyond that, because in syntax it doesn't make any sense to ask the question, how many sentences do you have? Because we make these sentences on the fly. And we could say syntax is therefore unlimited to the power of 10. Because it's only physical realities of our life that limit the length of any sentence that we can build. And there is much more to say about syntax in terms of creativity, syntax is really the thing that allows us to talk about everything. And you can measure the creativity of syntax for yourself. Think of an arbitrary sentence of, let's say, word length 10 and put it onto the Google or another search machine and put it in between quotation marks, and it's unlikely that you get a hit. So most of the things that we say, even the most trivial ones, are new in the language and maybe even in the history of the language. So that's what a syntax would be about. One example for the interest that lies in stuff like semantics I built a sentence such as the target was not hit by many arrows. This is the passive version of generally, if you form a passive sentence from an active sentence, the basic meaning stays the same. But if you have things like so-called quantifiers and things like not and a couple of other words in the sentence, all of a sudden this doesn't work anymore. And so in semantics we will be dealing with stuff like that. And the passive-active dichotomy will also serve me to introduce the next topic, namely pragmatics. So if something like Corona happens and I'm the President of the United States, I could and maybe should say I made a mistake, or probably I've made many mistakes. But the pragmatics of language gives us mechanisms to get around this and to formulate that in a quite different way. And this is also something how passive works, namely you can say mistakes were made. And the passive allows you to strike the agent. So the agent becomes optional. Mistakes were made by me would be the full sentence with the same meaning as the other one. But in politics speech, this is often the preferred version if something goes wrong. There is even a famous book with the title Mistakes Were Made, but Not By Me, political language. Which leads us right, let me skip for the moment the historical chapter, which leads us right into the topic of sociolinguistics. Where we deal with questions of prestige, of register. You don't address the Pope in the same manner as your buddies in the pub, and so on and so forth. And there's a rich array of research in sociolinguistics that includes all these topics. Jumping back into historical linguistics, One way to approach language, the famous one introduced by Ferdinand de Saussure in his 1916 book, Introduction into Linguistics, is the synchronic approach, where we look at various languages as they exist at the moment in the year 2020. And of course, we find up to 6,000 to 7,000 different languages. But we can also go back into history, and we will find surprising things about our own language. So we talk about, well, German is known since about 750, English began around 450, and so on and so forth. But actually, even though we call these things German and English, these are different languages. And how the one turned into the other, that is what historical linguistics is about. The last hyphen linguistic thing I'll be talking about is psycholinguistics. And psycholinguistics is hyphen linguistics to the power of 2, because it deals with various things like language production, language processing, language acquisition, language in the brain, language this and that, everything that can put the two terms, psychology and language, together in some way. That's what psycholinguistics is about. And psycholinguistics grew by leaps and bounds in the last 50 years by way of experimentation. Finally, we will have the summing up part, namely where we talk about language universals and typology. And that relates very much to the question, okay, does it really make sense to talk about language as something that is clearly delineated? And the response that we will come to, I think, is the answer is yes, at least when we are not talking about language in the metaphorical sense, but human language. There is a lot of variety, but the variety is not unlimited. Contra one sense of this book, Language Unlimited. This book in particular argues that what is a language and what is not a language can be clearly delineated, but that what turns out to be the basic characteristics of language gives language unlimited power. That's where the title of this seminar comes from. So I would like to invite you to this journey through those 10, not 10 commandments, but the 10 very important aspects of language. And I hope to do a lot to deepen the things that I just scratched the surface of in our seminar, to which I'm looking forward very much.